there's some interviews like so I was actually that's another one. It was 3 hours long. It was Jim Semivan and Peter Lavenda, and I had been trying to get them on the same podcast for at least 2 years.
In one of those emails, he called me a moron. So I was like,
Uh,
"Oh my God, we're on a
Sounds
knife
right.
edge. Like anything could happen in this."
But he just had us in absolute stitches. And I wasn't expecting this sort of complete rant from a genius of just dropping these gold nuggets and these bombs one after the other. And we were just like, this is it's chaos. You're trying to herd cats, it's you can't.
Yeah. And I said, well, if it's a truth, that's what you need to lead with. And it reminds me of that quote, wisdom lies solely in truth. And that so that was my rationale was if it's true, that's what you need to go with, and that's it. If I have somebody who comes to me who is even, let's say, somebody that was in the legacy program and says something to me, it's like, what the hell what am I supposed to do with that? Because I can't I can't share it, even if I don't attribute it to them. I can't prove it. So it's like now I'm just perpetuating like a rumor from the intelligence community. Was that the intention why they told me? Or, it gets complex.
Today, we're joined by James Iandoli, the voice behind Engaging the Phenomenon, a leading podcast exploring the UFO phenomena with a thoughtful, investigative approach. James has spent years deep into the mysteries of UFOs and UAPs, government transparency, and the broader implications of non-human intelligence. Through in-depth interviews with top researchers, experiencers, and insiders, he's carved out a respected space in the UFO researching and podcasting community for critical thinking, open dialogue, and groundbreaking interviews. He's an experiencer and a researcher and a humble, honest, curious mind. He's also a great guy and was one of my very first go-to podcasts long before I ever got into podcasting. And I wanted a serious researcher's perspective with hard-hitting interviews and good, solid, unfiltered information. He was doing it years before most podcasters in this space. So, make sure you give James a sub on YouTube if you haven't already. His podcast is linked in the description. And without further ado, the following is a conversation with James Iandoli. James, thanks so much for joining us. We really appreciate it. It's an honor speaking to you, and I've watched lots of your podcasts and lots of your interviews, and you do a great job. And part of the reason that I wanted to speak to you and Tom as well is to get a bit of an idea for myself, but I think people would really find value in it as well. In for the sort of podcaster's perspective, because we see us interviewing people all the time, and I think it'd be really interesting for people to get an insight into what it's actually like doing podcasting, how you got into it, and how you run it, and some of the interesting things that goes on behind the scenes, perhaps. So, if it's okay, just to give people a bit of an idea, where did your interest, firstly, in the sort of the unknown, the consciousness, UFOs, and stuff like that, come from? Where what was the? Have you ever been able to trace it back?
Yeah. I mean, first I'm going to start with the obvious. Great name, Jimmy, of
Thank you.
course. Is that Jimmy as in James or just
Yeah, yeah,
Jimmy?
yeah, yeah,
Okay.
James. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you for having me on. I love to see what you do with your channels and everything because I see you reach a lot of people and put out key information and bits like helps me like stay up to date, right? As a researcher. And I've been talking to Tom in the back, tagging on messages. But for me, from a very young age, right? So as far back as I can remember, I've been interested in, I mean, I guess you can say the anomalous, right? And that for me is personal because it began with experiences from out of body experiences, entity encounters, and those would happen sporadically. I didn't instigate them, but they always fascinated me. I mean, the out of body experience ones were more fascinating in the sense the entity encounters were frightening, but because of that, from a very young age, I took these kind of subjects literally and was interested. And anytime I would see a book at the school library or at the library or see a documentary on TV, I would just be, glued to it. And I actually live in the Hudson Valley, and there was a prominent UFO wave that was the last book attributed to Dr. J. Allen Hynek, which was it's called Night Siege: The Hudson Valley UFO Wave, and it's a great book. It was mainly written by, I believe, Philip Imbrogno, who I believe he was like a university professor in Massachusetts or somewhere in the tri-state, and I don't know the extent that Hynek actually worked on the book, but his name is on it. He was involved in some of the investigations of the cases, I believe. And, so a lot of people in my area don't shun the idea of UFOs away so much because in, you know, any given day, you go around in New York, especially where I live in the Hudson Valley, where it actually happened. You go around, you ask a few people, either them or somebody they know saw the activity, saw a UFO in the Hudson Valley UFO wave that spanned almost 10 years. And maybe it's like a kind of like vortex point two or a power point ley line or, one of those things. Not to mention, on top of all that, we have Indian Point, right? So nuclear facility, power facility, Camp Smith right there as well. So, maybe there was high levels of UFO activity in the 80s because of Indian Point. But also I think there's an older connection as well with like Native Americans and stuff. But so I was interested in all this very literally. Um, and then by if you know I was practicing meditation from like the age of 18 formally. And I don't know if it ties in too much if it's the cause of this, but 2 years after that, when I was 20 years old, is when I had a series of kind of in your face UFO experiences. That at that point I couldn't it wasn't merely an interest at that point. When I had those, because the experiences I had when I was younger, I could kind of just like say, oh, maybe there were spirits or ghosts, or I didn't know what they were. But this was really in your face and super physical, visceral. And again, that's a whole. I've done story, podcasts on that and interviews on that, and that's a whole like 2 hour story at the very least. But so back when that happened in 2007, I had this kind of series of in your face encounters, UFO encounters that correlated with high strangeness. I really made this somewhat my life's mission to be involved in this work, including serious research. And because of that, I was speaking to other researchers, right, on social media. I started some of the first or the first CE5 social networking groups back in 2009 and was very active in the CE5 field, both on the internet and then going out in the field with many people throughout the country and going to different events. And back then I was like Facebook messaging with Richard Dolan, right? So I was talking to researchers, and I would get some of them on the phone, and I would be having private talks with them, right? So I was already, without doing it on purpose or without thinking of it in that way, I was doing interviews. I was interviewing witnesses, just like because I was fascinated. So I was just asking them questions. So I already, but by the time I came out with engaged in the phenomenon in 2018 or so, well, that's when I launched the channel. I think I did my first podcast a little bit later than that. But I was already interviewing people for a long time, just privately. So, creating the podcast, I was able to share those conversations publicly in a more interview formal format.
Yeah, makes sense. Makes sense. Interesting. Yeah. I mean, I'm fairly similar, I guess, in that it was kind of having these conversations with people behind the scenes, thinking, well, why don't we share this? Why doesn't this, why don't other people get to see this stuff and hear this stuff? And I think for me, like I was documenting stuff just on like Instagram and starting to talk to all of these different people. Doesn't sound like to the same extent that you were from way back when, but there was that sense that this should be shared. It's interesting to hear that it's of a sort of similar start. Okay, interesting. So the format is that, I mean, how did you decide on like, right, this is how I'm going to do it. I'm going to do it this way. Did you watch other people, or did you sort of just have an idea of like, this is how I'm going to do it. This is how I'm going to present it.
Yeah, I mean, like a lot of things in my life, I guess, for better or worse, baptism by fire. I I just did it the way I thought it should be done, right? But also at the level that I could, feasibly do it. There's other people with great shows with crazy awesome production, and I wish I could do that. I can't do all that, but I just did it the way I can, and I'm always looking back and like, okay, wait, what can I do better? How can I improve it? What else should I do? For me, because I don't have like a whole production, I don't even have a team. It's literally just me. I always prioritize the research and the questions and the way that I'm going to approach the interview. That's my main priority. And, everything else comes after that. Even, the production value. I hope that doesn't bother people, but, even like the guests that I choose, right? When I choose like a guest, I'm not thinking like, man, I bet the guests will love this. Like I'm a little bit selfish in the sense like I want to talk to this person, right? And now I have an excuse. It's like, hey, you want to come on my podcast? So now I can talk to them, kind of thing. That's really the way I go about it. And it happens to be that other people are interested in the same stuff that I'm interested in.
You really, I mean, I've got to say, when I started researching this, you were one of the first channels that I was like, this guy gets it. That this is in the way that I want to learn about this. And you have a phenomenal recall for books and the history of it and names and dates and stuff. So without playing favorites, who are your favorite people? Well, no, it's an oxymoron, but who are your favorite people in this field? In terms of the researchers and the people that have, say, maybe gone before us or doing it at this time.
I better not screw this up. This is going to be public, right? No, no, no. Honestly, like the people that I look up to, like I mean, I remember from again, I never knew that I was going to be doing this stuff publicly like this, but somebody who always set a standard for me in a sense was like Richard Dolan. Like I loved how he presented the information, not only articulately but responsibly. Like he would always clarify if it was him speculating, if he somehow discovered it, if it's what he's thinking. Always clarified, the where, he didn't just claim like I know this is this and this. Maybe like somebody like Dr. Stephen Greer, right? But in a sense, I have to say Dr. Stephen Greer was important in my early journey, even though I don't agree with some of his approaches and some of the personality stuff. Definitely his very hands-on approach and like, he was speaking directly to sources, right? And deep in the government and corporations and all that, people that are tied into all this in the legacy program. He's been doing that for decades. Also somebody who passed away a little while ago, Jim Mars, right? I mean, he gets a little deep in the research and conspiratorial, but when I was younger, I mean, I loved reading his books. And I again, I liked his attitude in that he was like, "Listen, this is what I found. You don't have to agree with it." He was very kind of like that, very cool about it in that sense, where he wasn't making proclamations, but he did the research, said, "Hey, this is what I found. Take it or leave it." Timothy Good, his early work, his books are phenomenal. Jacques Vallée, of course, is just I love how Jacques Vallée always looks at things differently. Again, he's said it before. He'll look at the UFO as like a Zen koan, which is almost like a unsolvable riddle, but it's not just that, it's an exercise in contemplation. So, and being comfortable with the unknown. So there's, I mean, I would have to say almost everybody who came before me and us and everything, there's many, I mean, like Stanton Friedman, right? Like
Yeah.
the guy, talk about genius, right? I mean, as far as the guy was brilliant, and the way the guy could make the argument for the reality of UFOs was second to none. You know, I it just like a really cool memory is that his last tweet was retweeting one of the tweets I made about him. And
Wow.
so that was like, wow, that was a cool moment for me. But unfortunately, he passed away. I wish he was around to see everything going on nowadays. Maybe, maybe he's better off not though, because there's so much like craziness, right? So there's a lot of people that that I look up to in that sense.
And so how do you go about once you've picked a guest then? Because you, like I said, you've got really, really good information, but it always comes across as unforced and like friends having a chat in a room. And I think that's one of the best aspects of the way that you deliver it. It's not like you're trying to sell the audience anything. It's like we happen to be there in the room with you whilst you're having a really fulfilling conversation. So, how did you get from inexperience to that stage? Was there anything that you practiced, or did you just dive straight in and keep move fast and breaking things, as they say?
Yeah, it was more of just doing it. But partially it's probably also part of my demeanor. I'm naturally that way. I'm used to listening to people. So I like to give people space as well. There's a Buddhist practice that Thich Nhat Hanh once shared called like deep listening, or compassionate listening. And it's a practice or it's a skill, but you can utilize it even in simple ways. And it's like a lot of times when somebody's talking, you're already thinking in your head what you're going to say. And that's a natural thing. And sometimes I have to stop myself and say, wait, let me actually listen to what they're saying because there's so many times that we were just thinking about what we're going to say. So I'll just like actually listen to what they're saying and like forget like I have questions prepared and stuff, right? But like sometimes I don't even use like one fourth of them because the organic aspect of the conversation is the most important to have that flow. And even in my opinion, rapport, like if you're having a rapport with somebody, so there's that. And I mean, even I guess in preparing the questions is almost like an exercise for me preparing for the interview more than anything. And I have them if I need them. Although there's definitely some things where like I write down like I have to like put stars and everything next to it because I need to ask this question, and sometimes I miss them.
Yeah, I know what you mean. It's interesting you say that because I feel almost like it's the opposite for me, and I found that really interesting that you said that because I'm sometimes I get lost in what somebody's saying, and then they come to like almost an abrupt end. It's not when you play it back, it's not an abrupt end, but when you're in it, it's like wow, let's just finish. What was my next question? And it's sort of sometimes it's like a natural like you've got like a follow-on question that makes sense, but other times I'm just so sort of lost in what they're saying that you forget that you're making a production sort of thing, and you've got to
Yeah.
keep this going and with the conversation. Have you ever had any of those that are just any sort of wild? I mean, I can give you an example of ours. I think Tom probably knows what I'm going to talk about, but have you had any of those sort of interviews that have just gone a completely different direction than what you were expecting? Um,
Yeah, I mean that plenty of them. That's why I say like a lot of times I won't even get to like a fourth of my notes or even an eighth of them because here I planned what I thought the conversation was gonna go in that direction and it just like it didn't and I just dropped the notes. It doesn't, and I learned to do that as well because you got to stay with the conversation and there's a lot of times it goes in a different direction that you weren't expecting, and it turns out way better
Yeah.
than it would have if than what you were expecting in the conversation that you had prepared by your questions. So yeah, that's happened to me a number of times.
Yeah. Yeah. We had.
What's the?
Go on, Tom.
Sorry,
Sorry.
Jimmy. No, no, no. You go for it. You
I was just going to use the example that we had with there's a couple really. Jack Sarfati was quite an interesting one with us because it just it was chaos. I mean, don't get me
Yeah,
wrong. I love Jack. I love Jack.
yeah, yeah,
He's hilarious. He's unintentionally hilarious, I think. But
yeah.
he's just a genius. I can't say that I agree with all of his politics, but the guy
Right, right.
is a genuine genius. But he just had us in absolute stitches, and I wasn't expecting this sort of complete rant from a genius of just dropping these gold nuggets and these bombs one after the other, and we were just like, "This is it's chaos." You're trying to herd cats. It's you just can't do it. And telling us stories. I mean, I was probably the only time I've ever cried on a podcast, like out of laughter.
Yeah, yeah.
It was absolute chaos, and trying to edit something like that afterwards, it's just like, how do you just got to
Right.
it's
just leave it.
like straightening spaghetti. Yeah, that was that interview in particular was like we finished it, and I felt like I'd just done a rodeo and not fallen off. It was that I'd only spoken to him twice before by email. In one of those emails, he called me a moron. So I was like, "Oh my God, we're on a
Sounds
knife
right.
edge. Like anything could happen in this." And then
Yeah.
it just kept going well, and that got surreal. And then we got to the end, and I was like, "Oh my God, we did it!" Like that was we all had fun, and interesting things were said. It was really really
Yeah.
surreal. So who's the last one that you interviewed that gave you a knot in your stomach then?
What do you mean by a knot in my stomach,
As a
particularly?
so Well, I'm kind of speaking when I know that there's a few interviews I've done where I get nervous before, but not in a oh this is going to be terrible, like in a oh God this is a big one and it's going to be really exciting. It's showtime. So who's the last one that gave you kind of
Well, I
goosebumps?
mean, even the last one that I did with Jim, I've talked to Jim every time I talk to Jim, we're sitting down for 3, 4, 5 hours talking. Because the first conversation we recorded, I believe the interview was like 2 hours long, but we spoke 2 hours before we even hit record, and then an hour afterwards. I mean,
Wow.
that's just how it is. Every time I talk to Jim, it's just like it's like, you know,
Hmm.
all hell breaks loose in that sense, in a good way. So that, I mean, there's some interviews like I was actually that's another one. It was 3 hours long. It was Jim Semivan and Peter Lavenda, and I had been trying to get them on the same podcast for at least 2 years. You know, and so I was like, oh my, I was maybe over preparing, right? First I'm going through the Secret Machines War book, and then I'm like, oh my God, I have to go through the God's End Man book too. So I'm like trying to just go through different highlights of those books and my notes on those books because I had interviewed Peter on Gods. I've interviewed him on Man, and I interviewed him on War before it came out. So that, and I'm think like in my head, I could not schedule other interviews. I had to, everything else I had to just put to the side and just like zone in on that for like a good like few weeks. Uh, Again, because in part that I was trying to get that talk together for 2 years, and if you listen to their talks, the only place they've talked at the same time before the most recent episode of Engaging the Phenomenon was on the To the Stars podcast. And if you listen to those conversations, they're heavy. They're heavy, they're deep, they're intellectual, philosophical. They're awesome. So if I wanted to be able to live up to the conversations that they had together. And maybe it's in my own mind more so than out to the audience because there was great feedback from it. But in my head, I'm like always like, I guess trying to live up to what their conversations were on the To the Stars. I mean, if you go on to the To the Stars podcast, like the views are not crazy good, but some of the best conversations that I've heard in the last few years is Jim and Peter talking about all, God's man in war, but it's like the entirety of the phenomenon, the religious implications, the philosophical, the biological, the technological, all of that is thrown in there, and they have like two, three, or maybe even four talks now up there, and I was trying to live up to those kind of conversations when I had them on this past week.
I mean, it's subjective for me to say, but those interviews that you did with them are extraordinary. Like I've watched them a lot because the Gods and Man were the first two books I ever bought on this subject, and
Oh
I
wow.
I devoured them like over
Yeah.
and over again. And then the To the Stars interviews were great. They were really they were the dense kind of tennis match that I wanted to see from those minds behind it. But with yours, it was almost like when you watch a movie that you love and then you see the commentary afterwards, and the guys just expand it and blow it up and they go off into their own opinions a little bit. And with them being such different personalities, I mean, Jim is a fascinating character study because he's this collision of an explorer that wants the truth and a loyal government guy that,
Yeah.
he's got his boundaries. And Peter is very kind of arm's length with ufology. He came into it from his background of exploring the Nazis and all of that sort of stuff. So the flow between the three of you was just so natural, but it's really rich in data. It's one that you can just keep going back through and keep getting a little more of. So I mean, just on a personal note, thank you so much for those. They were brilliant.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I mean, those are some of my favorite conversations. I love talking to Jim. I love talking to Peter, and I, you know, I hope to have them on again for maybe I shouldn't say it, right? No, but I hope to have them on again for a whole series.
Wow.
Maybe like a six-part series. Because I told them, I said you could do a 12-part series trying to map out God's man war, and it's still scratching the surface. And it's funny too because, like, say Gods, right? Like some of the content that was in Gods for me was like a full circle because they talk about the Merkaba and all these Gnostic ideas, and I had studied that years ago, like many years ago. Like again, when I was talking about, I was reading books when I was like in my teens and 18 and 20 when the whole thing happened. Like in those years, I was into all that stuff pretty heavily, right? And especially with the Merkaba practice, because I was actually doing, it's not the same probably as the way Peter Levenda's coming at it, because I think Peter is coming from a different occult system that's more Kabbalah based when it comes to Merkaba. And for better or worse, the way that I came across it was through a different form of Hermeticism, Rosicrucianism, Melchizedek, New Age, because that was what was that's what came onto my lap, so to speak, when I was searching. So that's what I went with. That's all I knew at the time until later on. But you know, it was really cool for me to read that. And God's like, oh, I know all this stuff, right? I mean, not all of it, but there was a lot of stuff there. It was like I was getting all these pings of like I looked into that this year, I looked into this other stuff this year, like. But when it comes to Peter Levenda, his citations and sourcing is immaculate. It's just, you know, I get excited when I see all those sources, knowing that I'll never be able to truly go through them all, but like if there's a certain angle that I want to look at, the sources are there and you can do a deep dive on it. And that's incredibly important.
Yeah, yeah. Have you noticed a sort of willingness to speak more openly from some of the guests that you talk to now? Like you sort of going back to when you started to now, do you find that people, the way that they talk or what they talk about, or what they're sort of how far the line is up to, certainly people, if we're talking about people that had insider information, ex-intelligence officers, that sort of thing, do you find that they're more open now? And was there a sort of a point that you found that, okay, this is slightly different from the conversations I might have had a couple of years ago? Because I mean, I certainly found that from the people when I started doing the podcast, it's only like 2.5 years ago, whatever it was, it was so hard to get people to talk initially, and those that did talk, did that were prepared to talk, were not as sort of open about things, and it almost feels like, I don't know if it's like the stigma falling or because it's just more people are talking about it, high profile people. That's kind of how I felt. I don't know if it's the type of conversations that people are prepared to have, like how far to the line or how open about some of the more woo-woo stuff people are prepared to talk about.
Yeah, I mean, for sure, and most certainly in the sense of intelligence people being able to talk more, because I remember, where the conversation was at, and even say 2017, the New York Times article drops, two videos come out, and then one subsequently a few months later, the Go Fast came out a few months afterwards. And that was kind of like the spark, right? People were just starting to more openly talk about it outside of the, UFO research world, let me say. And the conversation that people that had intelligence backgrounds, I mean, I remember they're saying, "Oh, we don't know if it's Russia or China." And some people are going to say, "Oh, they are in part correct, actually, that the conversation is being steered in a certain way, like a narrative, right? But the objective was to get Congress and the Senate and all those involved. And in order to do that, they had to have a strategy. They weren't just going to come out with the Navy videos, a Tic Tac video, and say, those are aliens, we have their bodies and whatever. So for a while, it was just like, these things are in our airspace. We have the evidence, we have the witnesses, we need to do something about it. That's kind of where the conversation started. And I remember in even like 2018 and 2019, I was criticized by some of my peers for pushing the crash retrieval issue. And they in a nice way, they were just like, "Come on, we're trying to have, UAP transparency. You're bringing in this crash retrieval stuff and you're just going too far. People aren't going to accept that yet." And I said, "Well, if it's a truth, that's what you need to lead with." And it reminds me of that quote, "Wisdom lies solely in truth." And that was my rationale, was if it's true, that's what you need to go with, and that's it. Like there's no compromising that. Otherwise, you're just compromising what you're doing. And I understand the wisdom of kind of like leading gracefully or slowly or whatever it is. But it was shortly after that people like Lou and Chris Mellon and other people started to talk about the crash retrieval stuff. And then it became like the person, actually one of the individuals who actually apologized publicly, again in a nice way, like, you know what, you were actually right about that. But it's come such a far way. It's not even comparable. And I think other than the 2017 New York Times article, there were plenty of like, I guess you can say, small victories depending on how you look at it, where there was progress being made in the UAP conversation publicly. But I think since the 2017 one, the biggest really significant event was David Grush coming forward and testifying under oath in Congress. I mean, I think that's really when it was like, go for broke. That's when, no holds barred. That that was the point where everyone was just like, the hell with it. Right. And like, yeah, like, I mean, conversations that I would only have privately, off the record type conversations now is like more of that type of conversations happening publicly. Even with some intelligence people, right? They're really coming out even for them, right? And that's for whatever reason. I'm sure there's a number of reasons for that.
I was going to ask based on that because the conversation has like David Grush. I totally agree. I mean, he was somebody that you could get anybody off the street and go, look at this guy. Here's his back. He's under oath right now. Just just there we go. There's no more possibly this and maybe that. And he was a really straight up and down guy to come out with it. But then I'm really interested in how the conversation has gone from there, and then you get people like Tom DeLonge and Diana Pazulka, and now we're sort of talking about rituals at NASA and the Greek gods, and we seem to. I don't know where the line is between what's woo and what's not. I mean, I hate the term woo anyway, but it just seems to apply to things that we shouldn't talk about. Like that's the last vestige of the stigma. Have you got any kind of bearing on? Why that's been steered that way, and if there is a kind of central organized, okay, guys, we can talk about this now, narrative.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny you mentioned the that kind of stuff because the I remember reading Richard Hoagland's old book years ago, Dark Mission, I believe it's called, and he was talking about the Freemasonic involvement of NASA and the thing to do with like the angles, the numbers, the dates, and he was talking about that kind of stuff years ago, but it was not coming from a university professor. And at the time when Diana Pasulka wrote American Cosmic, I believe she was at that time still the chair of religious studies at North Carolina, Wilmington. So, but also, if Richard Hoagland's book came out in 2018 or 2019, it might have hit differently. Right? A lot of stuff that is in the old research world, Timothy Good, even, Richard Dolan's older books, UFOs in the National Security State, if they had dropped post 2017, it would have hit differently. So all those books from like the, you know, past decades, people look at them differently now, right? Like, there'll be something like the USO thing, right? Like it's almost it's almost like nowadays when you say something like that, it's like a new thing. But everything's there in the past, man. Like Ivan Sanderson wrote that book Invisible Residence about USOs years ago. And it was like, wow, at the time it was like a cool UFO book. I mean, it's before my time, but I had come across it. And it was like, and when it was UFO research and not so much in the public, it was like fascinating and everything. But now it's when you bring forward an idea like that, it's taken more seriously, right? So because of the everything that's happened. So there's a lot of things like that that are what you would consider woo. And it's like, where's the line? But all this stuff is there already. But it's being reintroduced in different ways. And I just think that's because the people that are serious about this, like Jacques Vallée, I mean, if you read his journals, again, he's talking about Rosicrucianism and all this stuff. Alan Hynek was involved in Rosicrucianism. That's what these it's just coming out now, right? These guys who are studying the remote viewing program and consciousness, the UFO stuff is there, and Jacques Vallée had written many books on UFOs, but those guys are really interested in much weirder stuff, right? And now it's finally like peak time where you have to ask those questions. And it's just more people are finally asking those questions because it's now like, holy shit, excuse me, UFOs are real. What else have I like taken advantage of or taken for granted all this time? You have to, it's the ontological shock or ontological reevaluation period that people are having now more. It's almost like we're having a consensus reality ontological like reevaluation now with the UFO thing, and that kind of ontological shock or reevaluation that people have when they first get into UFOs or have a near-death experience or have a UFO encounter is finally happening on like a global scale because people are like, oh my God, this is real. And people are being convinced when they see headlines that you have a UFO whistleblower talking about crash retrievals in Congress under oath, who was a guy who prepared presidential briefings, right? The NRO, one of the most secret organizations in our intelligence apparatus, the NRO, right? Most people outside of the UFO world had never even heard of that because there's no reason to. But people in the UFO world had heard that from research from other people. But this guy was deep in intelligence and is clearly articulate and intelligent and has the bona fides to back it up. And if he's saying this kind of stuff and being backed by somebody like Carl Nell, who's his superior, I mean,
Yeah.
look at this guy's background, right? This guy was involved in like Lockheed TRW and every aerospace, future army stuff. It's like what? Right? Like very well spoken, well put together. It comes out zero doubt.
Yeah.
Uh, what can you do with that other than say what is going on?
Mm.
So I think a lot of people are having that kind of moment now when they see these articles or even popular YouTube videos. Like it's clearly out of the UFO research community now. All these things, it's taken off,
Mm.
right?
Yeah.
So I don't believe there is a line anymore of like what's woo. Look at the telepathy tapes, right? Like I did not think something like that would gain so much popularity to even surpass Joe Rogan, even for a short period. Is it just speaks to people's interests and where their head is at. And even if you look at all this science stuff, right? Like this all these scientific discoveries, it's like what? It's like I read about this in like in the New Age section like 20 years ago, right? Or it was proposed as like it was in a sci-fi movie that they were talking about these kind of ideas. Like it's right in front of us now.
Yeah. Powerful stuff, isn't it? You mentioned Carl Nell. I remember when he came forward, and I think shortly after, was it after Grush? I think it was sort of backing him up, wasn't it? And
So
it,
yeah,
go
yeah.
on.
No, I was just gonna say he came out with Grush in that article as somebody who supported his testimony and he should be taken seriously. But yeah, he did come out afterwards
Yeah,
publicly finally.
yeah. And I remember feeling at the time I was trying to sort of contextualize it. I was trying to find a way of, I guess, articulating it on the podcast and that how it made me feel when they came forward because it was sort of like, and the best way I could describe it was like these really big important figures were finally on our side. And it was kind of like we had someone batting for us who just had this really high profile and super credible. Whereas previously it'd been all of these different people and researchers. It's easy for someone to say, okay, well, whatever you've researched, but I can't be bothered to research what you've researched, and I'm sure if I read all that, then I might think what you do. But I'm not going to read that stuff, so you're probably wrong. Whereas you've got somebody, well, here's a couple of people who would have been in a position to know this stuff, and they're saying that and it's huge for their a credibility killer really if they're making stuff up or they've lost their marbles or whatever. It's these are war heroes or heroes of the intel world and gold stars or whatever they've got from their history, and all of a sudden they're just a UFO loon. From that point onwards, and why would they do such a thing? I thought that was such an important thing for, I guess, the UFO, hate to use the term, but UFO community, people in the UFO field, just having someone batting for us, really hugely high profile and recently, retired or recently leaving the organization, not somebody that's talking about something from 50 years ago or 30 years ago in a book or something. But it brings me on to my next question, really. Because I know I do you have like a sort of sense of responsibility for what you put out, the sort of content that you put out, and the conversations that you put out? Because I've had this before, and I guess we're probably quite different in that because I do a lot of UFO videos and stuff, and people send videos in of UFOs. And in the early days, someone say, "Look, I saw this; it was crazy," and I put that out on Instagram, and it gets lots of views, and that's always a sort of a popular thing if you're trying to grow. But then after a while, you're like, well, that was wrong, and then that's probably not that, and that's probably conventional, and then other people would criticize you, like, dude, why are you putting out? You're muddying the waters, and I'm like having to take a step back and go, okay, there's a responsibility here when you start to have a platform that people are tuning in to what you're putting out, and if you're putting stuff out that doesn't help the cause, so to speak, then you're doing a disservice, and I really took that to heart and had a lot of reflection time on that. And I guess it's sort of same question to you, really, in terms of what you put out in on your platform. Is there a sense of like a responsibility? Do you get that, or do you just go, look, this is what I'm interested in. This is what I'm going to put
No,
out.
I mean there definitely is, and it's very difficult because there are I mean there are definitely people trying to steer the conversation, and you can't really truly know what their intention is, right? You can only read them as a person. As is this person like do they seem like a genuine person? Do they seem like a good person? That doesn't make them right either. But what I'm trying to say is that I don't want to intentionally perpetuate any narratives that I don't think make sense or for some kind of ulterior motive. And it's difficult because there's different strategies being played out right now, and they have been for in part to make progress to this field, but also to what end? So if there's people in the intelligence community and they're trying to put some of this information out there, what is their ultimate motive in doing that? Is it for some longer standing intelligence program? So I mean, you have to keep all those things in mind, right? And in that sense, it's almost like a gentleman's game, right? In the intelligence field. And so yeah, the best way I think, and then this kind of goes back to what I was saying before of why I loved Richard Dolan so much, is because if I can present information, I could at least in some way caveat it and say, this my experiences I know for sure, right? For me, they're real. I don't expect anybody to necessarily believe all of them, and I understand that firsthand because when I was having the experiences, I was like, for somebody to have the kind of like paradigm shift that I had in those moments, you would have to experience it, and that's why I got so involved in CE5 and contact work because I realized that in order for somebody to have the same kind of passport to the cosmos that John Mack talks about, this kind of ontological transcendence in a way, right? Of really like for matter of fact, knowing that there's more to the universe and such, you have to have that kind of experience. And so I could tell my experience to, and maybe it'll open people's mind to some extent, but that's why I got so involved in C5 is because, you know, people can potentially have their own experiences through that kind of modality. So when I talk about my experiences, I don't want people to just take them at face value in a sense of like my experiences were for me. So and all the effect afterwards is everything I'm doing in a sense, but also, you know, me talking about my story, I have to say that I don't expect people to just completely believe in even have the same kind of paradigm shift that I had through having them. So I I share that just because I feel that if I had the experience that I'm obligated to share that with people in the sense that people always wonder, oh, are we alone? Or and as far as I'm concerned, you know, no, we're not alone. We haven't been here alone. And these, I during that experience or some of those experiences, I got a download of sorts. I put it in quotes because that's the only way I know how to describe it. Somebody else would say a packed thought form, but that this intelligence or intelligences wanted people to know that they're here. But I also have to look at this from an even more complex angle of is this the phenomenon, the UFO intelligence, playing an intelligence game on me somehow, right? I genuinely don't feel that's the case, but there's layers to this, right? It's not just the intelligence community. You have a whole complex kind of tapestry of people sharing information because they find it interesting, people sharing information because they want to get hits and clicks, people sharing information because they're part of an intelligence operation, people sharing information because of the phenomenon, right? Because they had direct experience. And again, and then what is the intention of the phenomenon by interacting with these individuals, knowing that they're going to go out and talk about it. And that gets to Jacques Vallée's cultural effects, right? And even messengers of deception, right? So it's really complex. I'm sorry I made this into such a such a dramatic thing, but like I'm really
No, it's
digesting your
fascinating.
question.
Yeah, yeah. No,
Yeah,
you've
I'm really
answered it really well.
digesting. Yeah, I'm really digesting your question, and like it is in some ways like there is a sense of responsibility uh, to try to report accurately and at least the way that you communicate it is important. I think that's it comes down to that, right? Like there's a ton of information. I'm sure you experience this too because you have a really big following, but if I have somebody who comes to me who is even, let's say, somebody that was in the legacy program and says something to me, it's like, what the hell what am I supposed to do with that? Because I can't I can't share it, even if I don't attribute it to them. I can't prove it. So it's like now I'm just perpetuating like a rumor from the intelligence community. Was that the intention why they told me? Or, it gets complex.
Yeah.
So, for me personally, the way I would use information like that is I'll use that to inform my research. And that's the way I usually frame those discussions with such individuals. That it's just to inform my research, not for public distribution or whatnot. But even that, I mean, I love the book and the documentary Mirage Men, right?
Yeah.
Just because it puts things into some kind of context. And I'm not trying to paint, oh, these are intelligence people, these are researchers, these are regular people that are not into any of this, and separate people into categories in a sense like everybody is just people, right? And different individuals from these different groups and categories kind of like go into different groups, right? It's not, you're not just in one group. So there's that level of the conversation where all of that is going on simultaneously. However, it is wise just to be oriented. So even if you know that you can't know certain things and you'll never know certain things potentially, it's good to know, where you are, who's around you, what their intentions may be, and based on that, just do your best, right? And I think if you're a good person and you just try to do things the right way, you'll be all right.
Yeah. Yeah. That's such a thorough answer, man. I love that. That was very very textured. I wouldn't have been able to articulate anything as well as that. I mean that's it. When you're saying that, I'm sitting there thinking like that. That's what I'm thinking. That's how I'm feeling. But yeah, you've explained it beautifully. Yeah, that's really interesting. It's I get a lot of people that speak to me behind the scenes, don't want to
Right.
be sort of public, and they'll say, "Right, this is," and it's like a massive thing, this huge thing. I'm like,
Yeah.
can I talk about this? No, no, no. Okay, right. What am I supposed to do with that then?
Yeah.
Like that's a really big deal, and I can't really talk. Okay, well, and and yeah, but you can try and cross-reference stuff, and it's interesting. I mean, there's no doubt that when we have a platform, some people are going to use us for that platform because it makes sense. And that could just be people that want to just promote their stuff, their products, what they're doing, or their public persona, or it could be a narrative, or and it's so hard to tell, isn't it? It really is. And I just thought it's interesting. It's something that I've thought quite a lot about, and I still get lots of. I'm sure I've got like one dude that's got three different accounts that talks to me all the time, and it's the same person. And don't look at this,
Yeah.
talk about that. Don't talk about this, talk about that. Like, just okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I've
Where's
got a question for both of you.
Go on,
If,
Tom.
if so, given it's a podcasty question, but if you both had infinite means, unlimited means, as in people to help or whatever you wanted, what would you do? Because we're all doing our best with podcasting equipment, and it can look a similar format. I mean, my webcam's duct taped to a stick in front of me, but if we had the opportunity to go anywhere, do anything, meet anyone, cover any topic, what would you do, James?
Man. That's yeah, that's a real, I mean, that's a real difficult question. My I there's a ton it's infinite, right?
Mm.
There's a ton of stuff that I would want to do. I would love to do in-person interviews, even if I had the ability to documentary style type research stuff. Um, Personally, I would love to have a center or facility, you know, not just for research, for contact modalities, practice, spiritual development, and all that kind of stuff. So, I mean, I would go the full nine, you know, and man, yeah, if I had infinite means, I would love to do something like what was done at the National Press Club conference, right? Like more events like that. They, they helped over I mean, the initial one, you know, that was facilitated by Dr. Stephen Greer in 2001. There were a lot of other people involved that didn't get the credit in that, like Dr. Edgar Mitchell, uh, and many others. But I mean, that event I mean, we're still feeling the reverberations from that event, I think, today, and in part why we're probably seeing everything happen. If it wasn't for that event, and even the the citizens hearing was one, but I remember in 2010 I watched like the 2010, I believe it was 2010. It was the National Press Club conference live stream of UFOs and nukes, right? The Robert Hastings one. And I mean, that was huge. It felt huge. The papers kind of covered around it, right? They barely covered it. But in my mind, I was just like, wow, man, this is like crazy. This is happening right now. So I think that I mean, the sky's the limit. I would just keep going, man. I wouldn't stop.
Yeah. Okay. I mean, I thought about this, and I'd love to do it. It's probably possible with not too much money, but if you had infinite funds, I would probably just try and bulldoze through disclosure by having just the world's biggest CE5 event over some of the
Right. That's another,
biggest,
yeah.
yeah, and just have just the best sensors that are just, it's, pay a load of scientists to go, right, you're going to look at these sensors and we're going to have all these people here. And you just to essentially have like a blueprint for what, the biggest debunkers, what would they need in order for this to be scientifically like, yeah, okay, we've got it. And then just make sure that we've got that standard from all of the sensors and enough people, and just have a huge CE5 event. And yeah, over, House of Commons and in the UK and Parliament, Buckingham Palace, all those sort of, just let's do it. A world's
Yeah.
C5 event, that would be amazing.
That's why I said, like I would want a center where I could
Yeah.
do that stuff because the the best way that I've seen CE5 is with small groups. It's not with like contact in the desert, or even I went to an event in 2010 with Stephen Greer and there were 200 people there. He did that for 2 years in a row. And it was okay, but smaller events that I've taken place with, and especially the ones that happened to me with just a handful of people, are more powerful for the probably the reason of coherence. So, I mean, Skywatcher now is doing stuff like that, but there's a lot of questions about Skywatcher, and that's another issue. But Stephen Greer actually had an event in France where the government was partially involved. And he talks about that and he shows the document, whatever. But that happened, and I had two friends that were there for that. I haven't spoken to them in a while, but they were part of that. And at that time, it didn't. It was kind of secret. It didn't really go much further, unfortunately, even though they allegedly tracked some stuff. But yeah, I definitely think you have like a high level CE5 project, but the focus has to be right. One of the issues with Skywatcher, uh, I'm speaking for myself here and from experience, is that it's inherently exploitative. And I know a number of people on the Skywatcher team, and they're great people, and I think they're doing what they're doing for the right reasons. But I don't know who's funding Skywatcher and all that, but the way it's being communicated, it sounds exploitative in the sense where if you're going out for CE5 and contact work, and the pure primary reason that you're going out is for the contact and for the connection, first and foremost, that's when you're going to have success. If you're going out to do contact work and you are like, man, we're going to get this evidence and we're going to get one to land and reverse engineer the technology. Maybe even if your intention is to share that technology with the world, and or to share the footage with the world just to convince people, that doesn't mean UFO intelligence is going to be on board with that and cooperative, right? And they're going to know that obviously if they're sensing your thoughts or whatever it is. That so when you go out for that kind of contact work, your primary directive has to be the contact and the experience and the connection, the communication, right? And everything else comes after that, second. So that would have to be, and that's kind of the problem when you have big investors influencing and guiding projects, is that they want a return on their investment. And why from a business sense, or if from a regular individual, like why wouldn't they? Of course they would. If I went out and just was like splurging $1 million, yeah, I'd be like, I at least want my money back somehow, right? If you're not like an experiencer and just like, we have to do this for the XYZ reason. Like again, I think Skywatcher is well intended in what they want to do mostly, right? I'm sure they do want to benefit from what they're doing as well, and that's human nature. But if you're going out and the primary reason that you're going out isn't about just the contact and just the communication and not for nothing, and maybe people are not going to like this, but Stephen Greer's approach, right? And I know people have issues with him charging, and when CSETI started increasing their prices, I voiced my opinion to CSETI leadership about that, and they were like, Stephen's going to do what Stephen's going to do, and that's what it is. But at least even when he was doing much more of those field work programs, the ambassador to the universe trainings, uh, the primary reason to go out was for the contact. It was not to get footage so much. There was cameras there, but that was always secondary. It was for the contact, and not for nothing. You know, Stephen Greer is Stephen Greer, but when he's out, when I went out in the field with him, there was like night and day shift. Like when he was in the meditation teacher zone thing and the CE5 zone, different person. Um, all that other stuff, went away for a little while at least. And if you're not going out with that kind of purity of intention, as corny as that sounds, you're not going to get the same results. And that, I think, and Christopher Bledsoe, people will say stuff about his footage, and yet he puts out some videos that I probably wouldn't agree that those are UAP, but he's still super, and maybe he's very biased in his opinions and what the phenomenon is and what all that stuff, but he still very much goes out with a very pure intention, and that's powerful. And that's why people like that, like even Stephen Greer, Christopher Bledsoe, or Dorothy Ezat in the past, uh, get results because they're not invested in some big company to exploit UAP for one reason or another, even if it's for the betterment of mankind, right? So there you have to find the disconnect there. And if somebody's putting together some kind of big project where they want to make progress in CE5, as far as I'm concerned, that is the primary component that's going to determine your success. So sorry for that rant, but I just
No, no,
you know,
no. I
for what that's
appreciate
worth,
it.
if there
Yeah.
were a like huge kind of CE5 event,
Mm.
there are certain things that would have to be in order for it to be successful, in my opinion.
Yeah, no, you make a really good point. I hadn't thought about that. But
I
so,
mean, I know this from experience from like, oh, I'm going to go out and do a C5, but I'm going to record, right? And I've done that a few times. And there was a few times I got some footage and it's on my channel, just very mild stuff. But when I went out there and I was just like, screw any footage, any of this, it's just about the contact and the connection and all that. It was like magic. And and I don't know if that's because like, oh, my mind is thinking too much about the equipment. No, I have to get it and record in this, and my mind's distracted, or just the intention and the UFO intelligence or willingness to respond when that is the primary goal.
yeah, makes perfect sense. I'm conscious of the time, James. I've really, really enjoyed this, and I think I'd love to do it again, maybe at some point in the not too distant future. Have another conversation. It's been a real pleasure, man. Real
Yeah,
pleasure.
absolutely. Yeah, anytime, man. As long as my window's open, so to speak, as long as I got, the time, I'm happy to come back on. It's great speaking with you guys.
Awesome. Superb. Okay, nice one, James. Well, we'll leave it there, man. Take care of yourself. Hope to speak again soon.
Thank you so much. Be
Take
well.
care.